Special meeting of the Liquor Control Commission is now called to order. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Hein.
Here.
Commissioner Argyris.
Here.
Commissioner Here.
Here.
Commissioner Brady.
Here.
Commissioner Vogel.
Here.
Commissioner Lang.
Here.
Chairperson Avascado.
Here. Approval of the minutes of the special meeting of November 12th.
So moved. Second.
Motion made by Commissioner Brady, second by Commissioner Argyris. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Hein.
Yes.
Commissioner Argyris.
Yes.
Commissioner Here.
Yes.
Commissioner Brady.
Yes.
Commissioner Vogel.
Yes.
Commissioner Lang.
Yes.
Chairperson Avascado.
Yes.
In consideration of a Class L liquor license for the Play Cafe LLC DBA Nibbles Play Cafe for private parties, 13 Huntington Lane. The events will take place December 2nd and 16th, 2012.
Do we have any questions?
So move.
Motion made by Commissioner Argyris, second by Commissioner Lang. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Hein.
Yes.
Commissioner Argyris.
Yes.
Commissioner Here.
Yes.
Commissioner Brady.
Yes.
Commissioner Vogel.
Yes.
Commissioner Lang.
Yes.
Chairperson Avascado.
Yes. We have a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Motion made by Commissioner Here, second by Commissioner Hein. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Hein.
Yes.
Commissioner Argyris.
Yes.
Commissioner Here.
Yes.
Commissioner Brady.
Yes.
Commissioner Vogel.
Yes.
Commissioner Lang.
Yes.
Chairperson Avascado.
Yes. Roll call, please. Special, I'm sorry, on the right page. Our regular meeting, Village of Wheeling special meeting, please call the roll.
Trustee Hein.
Yep.
Trustee Argyris.
Yes.
Trustee Here.
Yes.
Trustee Brady.
Here.
Trustee Vogel.
Here.
Trustee Lang.
Here.
President Avascado.
Here. Approval of the minutes, we have none. And Mr. Fondilas, any changes to the agenda?
No, Madam President.
No changes to the agenda. Have no proclamations, etc. We have appointments and confirmation. I'm putting forth for the Plan Commission Chairman for Mr. Rafato. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion made by Trustee Trustee Brady. I'm sorry. I'm going right down the line. Stand up.
Please stand up.
Trustee Here, and second by Trustee Lang. And we have a roll call, please.
Trustee Hein.
Yes.
Trustee Argyris.
Yes.
Trustee Here.
Yes.
Trustee Brady.
Yes.
Trustee Vogel.
Yes.
Trustee Lang.
Yes.
President Avascado.
Mr. Rafato, thank you very much for accepting the position of Plan Commissioner. And we look forward to you going forward with the Plan Commission. And thank you very much. Any citizens' concerns?
Yes, Madam President. Mr. Halleck.
Mr. Haley.
Good evening. President Avascado, Commissioners. My name is Harley Halleck. I think I know most of you from the Senior Center. I tonight would like you to ask you to reconsider thinking of closing the Senior Center. What I'd like to do is tell you much about what the center has meant to me in the last 11 years that I've been involved with the center. I've been involved with the center for that amount of time. After I retired from the corporate world of 45 years, I needed an outlet for my free time and my experiences of computers. I heard about the startup of the SeniorNet program at the Senior Center, and I decided to look into it and see what it was all about. Their motto was seniors teaching seniors. I visited the center, liked what I saw, and I became a volunteer and evidently became a coordinator, a head coordinator, and an instructor for teaching computers to people who have never even touched a computer in their life. The computer program is still going on today, but is now supported only by the Senior Center. I am also a member of the Senior Advisory Committee and have been in many ways active wherever I've been asked to help out. We have a current events group, which most of them are here tonight, which meets every Tuesday. We meet for 2 hours and discuss everyday topics of politics and news headlines and etc., whatever comes up. The center is a place to socialize and have resources for all residents 55 and older. The lunch programs, the casinos, the sporting event trips, entertainment, and information can't be measured in dollars and cents. In my opinion, it would be a gross injustice to close the senior center. The senior population is growing in Wheeling, and many seniors from other suburbs come to enjoy what we have to offer. A better way to offset the senior center budget would be to reinstate the vehicle sticker and dog licenses. Once again, I ask you to reconsider your thinking, as you won't give us a new center, but let's keep what we have going. Thank you.
Thank you.
Madam President, can I ask him a question? Who says we're closing the senior center? How did that
Where'd that come out?
We're not closing the senior center.
That's delusional. Where'd that come from?
I mean, it's nice to have all you people here tonight, but we're not closing the senior center.
Well, you've been talking about this for years.
No. We're trying to enhance the senior.
Let's-
Your budget, and that was brought up by John at your 15th meeting about if you want to save costs, you could take so much, from the senior center.
Well,
That's his
That's
opinion.
why I was quoting him.
well, we're not closing the senior center.
Did you bring that up? Not to
It's been an option for years. That's
Everything's an option.
recommendation.
Next time you take
Okay.
him out,
Thank you.
Ms. Pervin?
next time you take that guy out back there, you dump him in the river.
President Abrascato and trustees, I also heard rumors. I'm a volunteer at the Pavilion Senior Center. I also heard rumors that we were going to be closing the facility, and I just wanted to tell you that I work the lunch program. I serve lunch Monday, Wednesday, and Friday to the seniors, some of whom that's their only meal, big meal of the day. They don't cook, and they socialize, and a lot of them are here, and a lot of them couldn't come because they don't drive at night, so they asked me to speak for them. They go on trips, they go to the meetings, the entertainment, the programs, which are very beneficial. They're health-oriented and they're safety-oriented, and I thought that the senior center was definitely going to be closing. That's what we all heard. So that's why we all came, and I wanted to plead the case of the senior center not to close it, to, if we can't keep it open there, to move to another facility or something. But these people need it. The demographic is changing. The population is getting older now, and I feel that we will have more people coming. There are trips that they go on that benefit them, and I just wanted to get my words out. I don't have a speech written. I just felt from my heart that these people need the senior center. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Churchill?
Trustees? The two previous speakers have pretty well covered the ground. I really don't have one question. What are the current plans for the senior center? We heard about there's some talk about what to do, so that's my question.
If you like.
To explain some previous comments from our November 10th meeting, and obviously there is an agenda item this evening that will speak about this in more detail, One of the options that has been considered and has been on the table, as it were, for many years is the consideration to close the senior center. I don't think that there was any direction given from this board that said that the senior center was going to be closed. Additionally, there has been talk about third ambulances, a reduction service from the fire department. You know, all those things had been on the table for some time. I don't think there was any direction for any of that, that those would be put into, made reality. To answer your specific question about the senior center, in fact, we have been investigating new buildings for quite some time and looking to see what the opportunities are. That's certainly not promising anything, but we have been investigating a number of opportunities to try and see what is available and what we can make available for the future of the senior center.
Thank you. No more?
No, that's it.
No staff reports, no consent agenda, new business?
New business, all listed items for discussion and possible action. 13A, ordinance approving and authorizing the village president and clerk to execute a first amendment to the redevelopment agreement for the Millbrook Point development comprising a part of the North Tip District of the Village of Wheeling, Cook, and Lake Counties, Illinois.
Mr. Ferrillo?
Thank you, Madam President. Tonight before the board is an amendment to the redevelopment agreement that you approved in August for the Millbrook Point redevelopment. The amendment deals strictly with the amount of impact fees that would be owing from that development. Going back to August, the original version of the agreement provided pursuant to ordinance that the developer would pay to the taxing bodies roughly $169,000. The developer, pursuant to our ordinance, provided population trend information showing individuals that lived in phase one of this particular development. Our ordinance provides that a developer can provide such evidence and ask for a reduction in the impact fees due and owing. The reduction calculated by staff and recommended by staff is down to $122,000. In August, the developer was instructed to try to talk to the taxing bodies. Gary Levitas is here. He tried to do that. That didn't prove to, he didn't run into resistance, but essentially the taxing bodies stated, well, that's, talk to the village about that. And what is before you is the amended amount. I wrote a letter to the taxing bodies explaining the reduction, providing evidence for the reduction. The developer is here, and he has provided that evidence. Taxing bodies have not responded, have not provided any evidence in dispute or concern. So with that, staff recommends the amendment to the agreement that reduces the impact fees due pursuant to our ordinance down from $169,000 to $122,000, $453. This payment, the developer has asked that this payment come from his TIF incentive and he not be made to pay this up front, which is a bit of a diversion from our code, but it's also recommended that that be allowed as well.
Trustee Vogel?
When this was first brought up in August, I had asked the question of what the calculation or what the impact fees were compared to the calculation for the first year's taxes to find out if we were in the ballpark with what we were charging for impact fees. Did we ever come up with that answer?
Well, staff calculated this through community development. I don't have a specific answer to that, but these fees are much lower than what we charge almost every development in this community.
Right, but how do they compare to what, if this was on the tax rolls, how does this compare to what they would get from that piece of real estate being on the tax rolls? Is it more or less, is it in the ballpark? Have we ever calculated that out?
It was designed, the ordinance was designed to be in the ballpark for property values within this community.
Right.
We haven't done the analysis for this development, but we did the analysis when the ordinance was created, certainly 20 years ago, and amended again in 2010.
Okay, but
Can I add to that?
if not necessarily this piece of property, any property that we've got history on, have we ever compared?
I have not personally.
We have
Because
done
we did
general.
ask that to be done.
Yes, you did. We have done general analysis, and in fact, this is going to be the topic of a workshop so that we can deal with that specific This item is separate from the idea of impact fees. So we're going to give you a detailed analysis to discuss impact fees in whole for the first meeting in January. But to answer your question, Attorney Frollo is correct. They are in the ballpark. We don't have specific numbers for this development, but we are going to run all of those and discuss how the village would like to proceed, much like we did in 2010 at the first meeting in January.
Okay.
I got a question.
Trustee Jersey.
How do we determine the calculations for the reduction? Based on how? What?
Gary provided evidence of who's living in Phase 1, the number of adults, number of children, number of bedrooms. There's a formula that the ordinance calls for. Staff put in to the formula the evidence provided by Gary and his attorney and came up with an actual reduction based on the actual number of people living in the development.
And let me ask you this. Does every community have an impact fee on new development?
Just about every community.
Because I remember we did this 10 years ago.
Actually, you did it back in, I think even longer than 10 years ago.
I thought it was in '02.
It was before I came here. So you may be right. I mean, I was here in
It
'02.
was just before you came here.
All right, so if it was 10 years ago, you did it again in 2010
We amended it.
to make it, I think, a better ordinance and more realistic in terms of property values here in the community. But this is an opportunity for the community to make sure that the other taxing bodies are getting the equivalent of what they would be getting for that first year while they're providing services.
But
And it is a helpful tool.
But it's a community's choice to do that. It's not a mandate or a statute by the state or anything.
If your question is, do you have to have that kind of ordinance, the answer is no.
No, right.
It is definitely a board's choice.
So maybe at the workshop, we can talk about that. That'd be great.
That's the topic, absolutely.
Okay. Motion to approve.
Thank you. Motion by trustee Jersey,
Second.
second by trustee Vogel. Roll call, please.
Trustee Hein?
Yes.
Trustee Urduris?
Yes.
Trustee Heer?
Yes.
Trustee Brady?
Yes.
Trustee Vogel?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Yes.
President Abiscato?
Yes.
Item 13D, resolution of the corporate authorities to determine the amount of the tax levy for the 2012 tax year.
Mr. Fundulis.
Thank you, Madam President. The resolution before you this evening is a declaration, really, of our intent. As you know, we have filing deadlines that need to be adhered to, and tonight is really just a declaration of our intent concerning the percentage of tax levy increase should the village board decide to move forward with a tax levy increase. The conclusion of tonight's presentation, and we're going to go through a number of budget discussions in order to get there, can certainly be amended. The 7.5 that is attached to the resolution now was the recommendation and what was discussed at the budget hearing, budget workshop, of November 10th, but certainly can be amended this evening as you see fit, and the board is not obligated until December 17th. This is when we pass the actual levy. If Finance Director Monchang could come up, as we discussed during the budget workshop of November 10th, we are looking at creating some response to our structural deficit that has been building over the last several years. On the 10th, we looked at all of the individual department budgets and discussed them at length in a meeting that was a little over 8 hours long. We left that meeting with some options that we wanted to further investigate and talk about, and tonight we are going to do just that, looking at some of the bottom lines for where our deficit currently is and what we can do to affect that bottom line number. Before we get into looking at those specific deficit reduction options, Michael has a presentation that really is just a highlight to everything we discussed from the 10th, just for the public's knowledge and to refresh the board's memory. There's no new information in it. It's just highlights from our November 10th meeting.
You want to hold off on the deficit reduction option?
Yeah, please. Could we just do the highlight presentation, please? One of the things while this loads, after you saw one of the slides for deficit reduction options, one of the things that staff put together is a forecasting model so that as we discuss what implications a certain percent tax levy has on the current year's budget, we can get an immediate answer as to what effect that has not only for 2013 but for the coming 5-year cycle. So we'll also present that after Director Monchain goes through our highlight reel.
Okay, thank you. As the village manager indicated, this presentation tonight is fairly short because it's just a repeat in many ways of what we talked about on November 10th when we had our budget workshop meeting. So some of these things you've seen before, and I just wanted to refresh everybody's memory, especially for those who weren't here or didn't see the presentation on the 10th. Tonight we're considering a tax levy for 2012, the tax year 2012. And as you recall, the village is facing a $3.5 million deficit. At the budget meeting, it was 3.6, but since then, it's gone down a little bit because we've received some more recent information on sales tax and income tax receipts, which makes the picture look a little bit better than it did a couple weeks ago. We have this deficit, as you know, after experiencing several years of deficit budgets. And we've cut expenditures substantially over the last several years, as indicated by the fact that the 2013 proposed general fund budget is less than the 2009 approved budget. And as we discussed before, major sources of revenue are less than they were in 2007, and that's why we're considering a tax levy increase tonight. You'll recall this slide from a couple weeks ago too, which shows that in the second column here, the audited surplus or deficit by year going back to 2008. But I made the point that had we not transferred money to the general fund from other funds, the actual result would have been deficits in each of those years. And again, for 2013, we at this point expect a deficit of almost $3.5 million. We also talked about what we're calling and what a lot of people are referring to these days as the new normal. And I made the point previously that the village received nearly 60% of its general fund revenue from 3 sources: the property tax levy, the sales tax receipts, and income tax receipts. And as you can see by this table, our actual receipts for 2013 are projected to be over $2.6 million less than they were in 2007. And we have this stool that has 3 legs. And as you know, if 2 of the legs are wobbly, then the other leg has to make up for it. So my point here was that when sales tax and income tax are lagging, the only thing that the village has to look to make up that difference, aside from cutting expenditures, is the property tax levy. And the question is, well, why do property taxes go up? And in the case of the Village of Wheeling, as is very common among municipalities, most of our budget comes from these 4 categories, these 4 general categories. 80% is wages, health insurance, and benefits, pension benefits. And then there's this category I'm calling everything else, which includes commodities and contractual services and so forth. And what this table demonstrates is that if you have increases in each of these categories, and these increases are typical of what we've experienced in recent years, you can expect that your budgeted expenditures are going to go up over $1 million each and every year. And that's not taking into consideration any new programs, any new staff. It's just the existing status quo. And that $1 million is what has to be made up every year with new revenue. So again, going back to our sources of revenue, we're trying to make up $1 million each year. And what this shows is that is our projections for 2013 by category. So in the case of sales tax, we expect to get another $372,000. Income tax is anticipated to go down by $90,000. And everything else we anticipate going up 2% or $248,000. That means that with respect to the property tax levy, the general fund portion of the levy, not the total overall levy, but the general fund portion of the levy would have to go up by 4.71%, or nearly $500,000, just to make up the difference for the $1,029,000. And that does nothing for our deficit situation. It just covers the amount of money that's needed as a result of an increase in expenditures each year. As I said, the property tax levy is really the only source of revenue that the board has control over. And it's the only source of revenue really that can produce enough new revenue each year to offset these costs that are going up. Personnel costs alone are rising by $800,000 to $900,000 every year, and that's not including contractual services and commodities and so forth. And again, the village must bring in new revenue to offset those rising costs, or it has to look to core services to eliminate. There are really no other revenue options that are adequate for long-term sustainability. And so the staff has recommended, we recommended on the 10th and we're recommending again tonight, that the village board implement a multi-year tax levy plan that over a period of 5 years will allow us to get to a balanced budget in the general fund without the general fund having to rely on these other funds, most notably the capital projects fund, to make up the difference and to balance the budget. We're suggesting increasing the levy by 7.5% per year for the next 5 years. We can certainly reevaluate that after a period of time, but this is what's really needed to provide core services and to fund the village's infrastructure needs. And I think that's a really important point, because for the last few years, as a result of our situation with the general fund and the deficits that we've been experiencing, we have not been allocating as much money as we have in the past to infrastructure. And infrastructure is a core service just like police and fire and public works and the other services that the village provides. So in effect, by not funding our infrastructure needs, we have been cutting our core services. And again, you know, from the standpoint of the public and the businesses, the residents and the businesses, it can be argued that small incremental increases in the tax levy from year to year are easier to absorb than substantial fluctuations from year to year. You know, many people ask about the property tax bill, and they seem to have the idea that the village is collecting all these taxes, but that's really not true. The village is just one line item on a tax bill that has multiple taxing districts on it, and the village's share of the total tax bill is about 10.5% as of the 2011 tax share. That 10.5% provides funding for all of these core services that I've listed on the left here. And then again, at various levels, I've shown what the impact of a tax levy increase would be on residential property owners. So you can see what that impact would be depending on what your total tax bill is. And I made the point last time that if you're in a position to itemize your income taxes, that you would actually be paying slightly less than this. I think Trustee Vogel pointed out that there's only about, I think he said 22% of the population that can do that. But for those that can, they would pay a little bit less in taxes than what's shown here. And then this is the impact on a few businesses that I've shown in the past as well. In summary, this is the proposed tax levy as compared for 2012 as compared to 2011. You can see that there's changes in different categories based on the amount of money that we're allocating to debt service and so forth, and the increases in the pension funds. But the overall increase in the levy, the most important line is the bottom line, as proposed is 7.5%, which would produce an additional $795,000 in revenue next year. And as the village manager indicated, tonight it's necessary for the board to approve a resolution determining what the levy will be. It has to be done 20 days before approval of the tax levy. And since the total levy exceeds the prior year's extension by more than 105%, we need to do a public hearing and publish a notice in the newspaper. And then the actual tax levy ordinances, including the abatement ordinances, would be approved at the December 17th meeting. That's all I have on the tax levy. We've spent a lot of time talking about it in the last few weeks, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Do you have any questions?
Madam President?
Trustee here?
We discussed at the budget, and the village manager was supposed to come back to us with a couple options in regards to lowering the levy. We have not seen any of that, and now tonight we have to vote on a 7.5% levy, where we, and I know I was under the impression that we possibly could be looking at different areas to maybe assist in reducing that. And I know we all gave our conditional yes on the budget hearing, but is there going to be anything new that's going to come out tonight?
Perhaps it's better if I answer that. And Trustee here, I'm sorry if I misunderstood. When we left on the 10th, I tried to be very clear that there were no new ideas. What we needed to do was to look at all of the ideas that were on the table and choose the ones that made the most sense in order to affect the true deficit, meaning not transfer funds from one to another, but really look at how we can, we use the term structural, how we can affect our structural revenue side in order to truly eliminate or reduce our deficit. We do have that list. There's nothing new from the 10th on it. But again, just to be clear, the only reason that there is a resolution tonight is because of the bullet point number 2 that basically says if you are even considering raising the tax levy by 5%, you need to create this resolution, which is notification, and then do the public hearing. You can always go low, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, sure. You can go lower than that, you just can't go higher than that. So the board is not making a determination this evening that they are bound to by saying that we will raise the taxes by 7.5%. Tonight is a discussion, and we do have another presentation which deals with all of the options that are available to the board, and along with a recommendation. And again, I apologize if the board was asking for something that I didn't provide. I had tried to be very clear in saying that there were no new options. It's really a matter of creating a plan from what was already provided. Does that answer your question?
Right now, yes. Thanks.
So, yeah, maybe we can...
You finished? Did you?
Thank you.
Yeah. Michael, last year we had a 0% increase, so we may or may have not disserviced ourselves by doing that, but would, say for instance we did we split the difference and we did a 3.5% increase last year. How would that affect us this year?
It's a good question. To answer the question, I think we'd still be looking at, from a staff perspective, we'd still be recommending an increase of probably 7.5% or close to it. And the reason for that is that, we have this large deficit that's only going to get larger in the future as costs continue to go up. We have options to present to you for reducing the budget deficit, but a very key component of balancing the budget or getting to a balanced budget eventually is this multi-year plan for increasing the levy. We've gotten to the point where we can't cut our way out of this anymore without affecting core services. And so, we would still be recommending a significant tax increase, not just this year, but for the next few years. I have a spreadsheet that I'm happy to show you that shows, given a certain set of assumptions, how we can get to a balanced budget at the end of 5 years. But the tax levy is a key component of that.
And that's not compounding the levy where it increases year after year.
Well, that takes into effect the compounding factor.
Okay, but it's also a steady amount. You're talking 7.5.
We were talking about 7.5% for 5 years, and that's a plan that, given a certain set of assumptions for other sources of revenue and for expenditures, can get us to a balanced budget. And, without that, though, if the tax levy increases are significantly less than what staff is recommending, it's very difficult to get there at the end of 5 years.
And I don't have a problem with the 7.5 for the fact that we didn't levy anything last year, and I don't believe we should keep doing that. And I think that it does make sense. So, thank you.
Trustee Brady?
Thank you. I too don't agree with not proposing a levy, but I said it at the last meeting. It should almost equal the cost of living, like the rest of us get raises based on, and why not raise the taxes according to that? If it's going over that, then something is wrong. But going back to some of the other things from the last meeting, did we deduct that $54,000 that is now going directly to the fire department instead of through us from our budget?
That money, that $54,000 was not included in the general fund, but I don't know, John, if you want to answer.
Well, I was just going to suggest that we maybe perhaps to answer that question and any other questions, we just start going through our slides. And so I don't want to ignore that question, Trustee Brady, please. If we don't address it specifically, please remind us. But as Michael pulls this up, I think one of the questions that everyone may be asking is, as Trustee Lang said, not addressing this in years past certainly contributes to our current deficit problem. But I think that everyone needs to be aware that when we look at Wheeling versus some of the other communities, we have a major hurdle that other communities don't have, and that is we bonded $40 million several years ago that has to be repaid. So, we always compare ourselves to other communities, and I think it would be a misstep not to acknowledge that we do have, not only do we have to try and get ourselves out of a difficult economic time, on top of that, we do have to pay the mortgage as it is on that $40 million debt. So we are in a unique position versus other communities. So I think that just needs to be out there for consideration when we go through any of these things as to, well, why are we so high, and did we not do something in the past that we should have done? So on the screen before you are the recommended deficit reduction options. Again, these are all items that were discussed on the 10th. Save for the very first one, there is a position in the engineering division that is a shared service between CD and Public Works that I'm recommending not be filled. That is not the village engineer position. There is an additional vacant position that has recently become vacant that I am suggesting that we do not fill. We are in the process of advertising and soliciting for a village engineer. So that position is new from the 10th, and that is a savings of all in. That is not a salary figure, but a salary plus benefits figure for $130,000. The other items on the recommended list are all, again, going back to our refrain of structural, save for the liability insurance and SURF fund. These are revenue-generating, compounding sources. So you'll see the increase to the electric and gas use tax by 1%, which you know that utility tax goes to pay for our CIP programs. This is a transfer of the liability insurance fund of $200,000, which we have been doing for the last couple of years. Reduce the SURF contribution by 50% for a savings of $600,000. And again, speaking about SURF, the problem with using SURF money as a source of revenue is that that is a fund that needs to be paid back. So eventually, although we are shorting the fund by $600,000 and using that money for our general fund and against our deficit, that is money that eventually will have to be paid back in some form over the next several years. And then, of course, we have the 7.5% tax levy increase, which would generate almost $800,000. Instituting all of these items would bring our deficit from $3.5 million down to $1.4 million. $1.4 million is sustainable as long as we have a plan, as Director Monchain has said, to address our revenue sources for the coming years. So we can, if you'll indulge us, I was going to move on to the next slide.
I got a question regarding this slide.
Trustee Juris has a question on this.
And Trustee Brady does.
Trustee Brady, were you?
Well, no, it was just related to that, to the SURF transfer, which was what I brought up several weeks ago. You say you reduced it in half, yet in the SURF fund for the year 2013, you got $1.5 million slated for that. You're not reducing it in half. And if we do take all of that $1.5 million and use it to reduce the deficit, so we'll have a gap. Right now, it was stated last meeting that we have over $5 million or $6 million sitting in the SURF fund to buy squad cars, cars for inspectors, fire engines, whatever we need. It's a lot of money. I think we can afford 1 year without putting any money in there. Shouldn't hurt us, because we're not going to be replacing that much equipment at any one time during the whole course of doing business here. We don't need $1.5 million more in the SURF, which will bring us over $7 million in there at this time when we have a deficit. And, there was another thing I was going to bring up too, on Michael, on your revenue projections. You said that all indications, and according to you, that we weren't going to be getting as much tax revenue and that and the other. But yet, when you see what's going on in the stores, we had almost a record Black Friday in town here between Walmart and one of our grocery stores. It was phenomenal. The people that are shopping there. People are spending money. Why would we figure that we're going to be short on the revenue we're going to be getting from these sources? I don't see it. I really don't. This ending deficit, it could be zero, and if we could raise a nominal amount to the levy of 3.5% and be fine. We're not in that bad a shape. We have money in our savings account. Everything is going good. We're making every effort to get things, keep trim and keep moving forward. And now to come and tell us we have to go 7.5% for the next 5 years, I think is a little overboard in the increases. We don't need it. We don't need it. We can do without it. We can do with more reasonable types of expenditures. I happen to, and if I might, right now, I just want to take 1 second, because everybody complains about how high their taxes are here in Wheeling. It's been going on and on and on. While I was on my way up to Riston Center week before last, I happened to stop for some cheese, and I picked up a Riston Center newspaper. They got the budget on the front page, and it's amazing. They had a little over $1 million budget for Spring Green, Wisconsin, small little town on the river. Spring Green, Wisconsin, their budget is $1 million, and it says that reflects so much on their real estate tax. And what it says here that a home there that's worth $150,000 pays $4,200 a year taxes. And you know what they get? They get a volunteer fire department, one county cop, no sewer water, and they get the roads taken care of and plowed. And this is compatible with my home. I pay just about almost the same thing, and my home's at least $100,000 more valuable. And look at the services we get. Look at the services we get for this money. You know, I'm not saying anything about the fact that, you know, we do have a lot of services and a lot of expenditures, but we don't have to raise the taxes to keep it going. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Can we
Trustee?
answer some of the questions?
Sure, go ahead. Go ahead. That's all right.
Okay, Trustee
Well, I mean, he
Agiris
asked
had some,
questions.
in between, do you have questions, or they'll answer?
I want to talk about this slide here, that's all. But if he wants to answer, Mr. Brady.
He's going to answer Trustee Brady, and then we'll go from there. Is that our
Sure.
meeting? All right, thank you.
I just want to respond to a couple things that you brought up. With respect to, Trustee Brady, with respect to the SURF fund, the reason you cited the $1.5 million figure, there's three funds that contribute to the SURF fund: the general fund, water and sewer, and 911. So the general fund share of the SURF contribution is $1.2 million, and that's why 50% of that is shown on this slide as $600,000. With respect to, sales tax, we certainly take into consideration, Black Friday and the things that are going on in the community, the new restaurants and so forth. Those are all figured into the calculations. I have a 4.45% projected increase next year in sales tax, taking into consideration what you were talking about. And that might be, I'm fairly conservative when it comes to these revenue projections, and that one gives me a little bit of heartburn, because I'm not sure that I'm being, that I'm being conservative enough, I guess.
Michael,
but
you've been good the right way. You've been wrong the right way the past several years.
Right. But, we have looked at each revenue line very, very carefully in order to present the most realistic picture that we could to the board. And this is our best guess at what this deficit is going to be. And at some point, I'd like to bring up, after we've answered all the questions, this spreadsheet that shows projected revenue and expenditures for the next few years, because I can very easily plug in whatever tax increase you want to plug in and show you what the impact is. But, if we're talking about something in the 3 or 4% range, it's not enough. It's just not.
As money loosens up in the housing industry and more development, and as commercial development moves into town, that's going to bring in more revenue that you have to figure in too, because that's going to, property tax isn't going to be paying for the whole thing. I mean, we're going to have other means of income that are going to be increasing along with the taxes.
Well, the only income that we get, that we directly get from economic development is sales tax.
Well, real estate tax.
Well, only to the extent that you increase your tax levy, because our tax levy for this past year was $10.6 million. If we got a brand new shopping center in Wheeling and we didn't increase our levy, we'd still collect $10.6 million. So when you have new growth like that, you still have to increase your levy to capture those dollars. Now, the effect of that would be that it would have, it could have no impact on the existing homeowners and businesses, because the tax burden would be spread out, but you still have to increase your tax levy to capture those dollars. Whatever you levy on the 17th is what we're going to collect. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Agiris.
Okay, just a couple, let me piggyback on that a little bit. Explain that a little bit more. Your projections on one of your previous slides actually show the property tax revenue going down in the neighborhood of around $800,000. Why is that? Compared to the prior year?
You're talking, let me go back to
It was
that.
income tax, I believe.
No, it was property tax.
No, I think I know what you're referring to.
You know what I'm talking about.
No.
It was towards the end, Michael.
Here, this one.
There,
Yeah.
813,000.
The reason for that is because you'll recall in 2011, we took $1,300,000 from the Capital Projects Fund, and we used it for debt service. So we were able to reallocate that money. Instead of it going to the debt service line item up here, it went to the general fund. For 2012, I'm not showing that. I should say we're not showing that. Because staff, I think, very much wants to see that money return to the Capital Projects Fund to be used for infrastructure needs, for street projects specifically. And so as a result, because we're not reallocating that money, you see a decrease in the general fund of $800,000. But this is a shell game among those four line items. The bottom line is that if you were to pass an increase of 7.5%, it would produce another $795,000 for the general fund.
Here's a question for you. Today, with those four line items, we're collecting $10.6 million
Right.
out of real estate taxes. Do we have a figure or a number that, what kind of dollars are really being collected in Wheeling on real estate taxes? That's the village portion that they're getting billed for, that the difference between that and this $10.6 million. Is it a lot more?
It is. I mean, our portion of the tax bill is 10.5%.
Right, but are there taxes out there that we're not collecting because we haven't levied for it or try to recapture the growth?
You know, it's a great question, and we used to talk, I should say, I used to talk many years ago when I made the same presentation about this concept of new growth. You know, back in the days when we were seeing increases in EAV in the community, and I'm talking about the value of your home increasing, you remember those days, and the value of businesses increasing and so forth, we would see an overall growth in the EAV of the community. Well, to capture those dollars, you have to raise your tax levy. I haven't talked about it in the last few years because there hasn't been any growth in the EAV. There's been just the opposite, which is something none of us have ever seen. Our EAV has been declining the last few years because the value of homes and businesses have been declining from an assessment value standpoint.
But that's weird, though, because property taxes have actually gone up, even though the assessed valuations have gone down.
That's right.
We're paying more, even through the last couple of years. We're paying a lot more.
That's true.
And our values are far, down a lot. So where does this money go?
Well,
it kind of contradicts what you just said right now.
And I understand what you're saying. I mean, from a logical standpoint, you would think that if the value of your home is declining, then your taxes should decline as well. But the way that property taxes are calculated is a relatively simple formula. They take the EAV for the community, and they take the tax levies of each of the taxing districts, and they determine a tax rate. If the Village of Wheeling levies the same thing as it did last year, but the EAV for the community drops, then our tax rate just goes up. Or if we levy more than we did last year, the tax rate goes up even more. So the impact is that it doesn't, in a sense, it doesn't matter that the value of your home is going down in terms of how much you pay in taxes, because as long as the taxing districts raise their levies or keep them at the same level, you're still going to pay the same or more as you did before.
But why is that? And a good example is the zero levy that we did last year for 2011, and my taxes went up $1,498. The village portion from the year prior went up.
Right.
Because the tax rate was changed by powers to be. Where did that money go?
Well, we
didn't ask for more.
We still collected the same amount. You know, we levied $10.6 million, and by and large, that's what we collected, $10.6 million. it all ended up in the same place. But, you know, I did a presentation a while back trying to show the concept of tax burden. If the value of your home declined, but didn't decline as much as someone else's home,
Right.
that tax burden is going to shift to you, unfortunately. So while the village didn't increase its levy at all, you may end up paying a greater portion of that 10.6 than your neighbor did.
Right.
Okay, because everybody's home, generally speaking, was assessed at a lower level, but not at the same level.
Right.
It wasn't the same decline.
Plus the tax rate went up
Right.
a lot. Now, the difference between abated and non-abated that you show in here, why don't you give a definition of that? Because it takes away from what we're getting, less the abatement and all that other stuff. Explain that a little bit, because I know a lot of people don't understand that.
What happens every year is when I present to you the tax levy ordinance, there's a general ordinance, and then there's a series of abatement ordinances. And the reason for that is because, as you know, the village over the years has issued debt for various projects. And that, when we sell bonds, an ordinance is filed with the county that requires the county to levy the taxes necessary to pay the debt service on those bonds. Sometimes the village issues debt with the intention of using existing funds to make those debt service payments. And so we use funds from the Capital Projects Fund, from the TIF funds, from the Water and Sewer Fund, and so forth, to pay that debt. In order to stop the county from levying those dollars, we have to have the board approve an abatement ordinance. And what that does is it basically directs the county not to collect the dollars necessary to pay the debt service on those bonds, simply because the village has the money in another fund to make those payments itself. Okay. And that's what abatement means. Abatement, I think I've always thought of it as it's setting aside those levies.
That's all I have right now. I'll come back.
Trustee Vogel.
Michael, I'm completely confused as to how the 7.5% increase over 5 years is going to address the total deficit.
Okay.
What's built in for revenue increases? And let me tell you where I'm coming from. If you look at this and you say the 2013 increase over 2012 is $800,000, okay, and you compound that over 5 years, you're talking about $4.5 million more in taxes, okay, right, for that 5-year period, not by the 5th year, $4.5 million more, right, for the 5-year period.
Right.
And we're running a deficit of 3.3. You multiply that out by 5, if this is business as it's going to be, that's $16 million. How does a 7.5% tax increase with business as it is, not going to increase other revenues, address that?
Can I interrupt to answer that question? Trustee Vogel, and I guess the rest of the board as well, we have a forecasting spreadsheet that specifically answers that question.
Okay.
Would you like to see that now, or at least see, we can go very quickly through the other slides, just so that you all have the information as we answer that question?
That's fine.
Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. Michael, if you go back to the
Sure,
the options slide, we talked about this first slide, so we've had this one up here for a while. This is that was the recommended option. Trustee Brady had said earlier during one of his questions about the idea of using the SURF fund, or there are a number of other options. Using the SURF fund.
Who put that on there? Closing the senior center.
It's an option.
Not recommended.
This is a not recommended option that has been talked about for many years, was presented on the 10th.
Who's been talking about closing the senior center for many years? I certainly have never, and anybody else up here has never said close the senior center.
We've talked more about moving it,
Moving it.
not closing it.
Nobody on this board talked about
Closing
Can
it.
John go
Closing it up.
forward? Can John go forward with the slide? Mr. Fabulous.
The items, as Trustee Brady had mentioned, similar to using the SURF, are short-term, not solutions. They are short-term Band-Aids to addressing the actual deficit. There are a number of other options that can be considered when looking at simply getting to a balanced budget. These are some, and on the following slide there will be other revenue options. Again, these are not recommended options, and they are all things save for the last item that have been at least brought up before. The crossing guard program was a question from a trustee asking whether we needed to fund the crossing guard program. It is a very good question. We did a little research and came to find that nearly all municipalities fund the crossing guards for their community. As you can see, it is a line item worth $90,000. We have looked at other kind of sharing ideas with the school district, and we could certainly investigate that further, but that was a suggestion and a question made by one of the trustees. And it could be something that we look at in the future, not necessarily something we could cut out this year specifically. The next slide deals with revenue options that again are not recommended, because as we've been talking about from the 10th and from tonight, our revenue comes from taxes, but obviously we have to be aware that we can only tax so much. So there are other options that we can consider. Again, these are revenue options that we are not considering, that we are not recommending, but certainly are available for the board to use to help get to a bottom line number. Increase in the food and beverage tax, we currently have 1%. We can increase it to 2%, which would bring in nearly $850,000. We have the ability as a home rule community to increase our sales tax by 25%. That would raise another $894,000. We can implement a gasoline use tax, which is 0.2 cents per gallon. As the asterisk says, that is based on other towns. That's a difficult one for the Village of Wheeling, being so close to Lake County, where there's a different taxing structure and would create problems for our businesses selling fuel. And another item that has been talked about for many years, we can implement a village sticker program that is estimated to bring in between $800,000 to $1 million in additional revenue. Again, these are revenue options that are not recommended, but are available for the board to discuss. The next slides are really more about capital projects in specific, so I think maybe now is a good time to bring up the forecasting slide and we can address Trustee Vogel's question. Again, everything that I just talked about, those are simply tools in the toolbox that the board can use at their discretion to help come to a final number. This is the Excel spreadsheet that allows us to, you see the list of assumptions on the left. It is a 5-year projection, and we can change the assumptions, or we can insert the tax levy at the very top. You see it's currently at 7.5%, and you will see the effect on the following 5 years. In fact, Michael, if you would can you change it to 3 or change it to some other number just so that everyone can see how the link and the compounding works?
Can I talk about this?
Please.
I created this spreadsheet. This is a summarized version of a more detailed spreadsheet that we have put together for years that I don't normally show, but we actually go line item by line item through our sources of revenue and our expenditures, and we make projections on a multi-year basis of where we think we're going to be at in the next few years. In this case, I've summarized these revenues into 4 line items and the expenditures into major areas just for simplicity purposes. But at the top, or actually rather in this column in the middle, you can see the assumptions that we're making for not only revenue but each of these expenditure line items. So just quickly, we can plug any number in here. I've got a 4% increase in sales tax per year for 5 years, income tax at 3.5%, everything else at 3.5%. And then on the expenditure side, if you assume increases in salaries and longevity of 2.5%, and then various assumptions for these other categories of expenditures, you can see the bottom line here is this number in the bottom right-hand corner. This is where the surplus or deficit will be in 5 years, given this particular set of assumptions. And as I said, we could plug anything you want in here, and you can see what the potential impact is. But at 7.5% for the property tax levy, you can see at the end of the 5 years, that fifth year would have a projected deficit of about $326,000, which quite frankly, for me, is within the range of error here. $325,000 could be wiped out, as given a better scenario with any of these other assumptions. So that's pretty close to a balanced budget, assuming the tax levy increases by 7.5% for each of the next 5 years. But going back to the comment that I made to Trustee Brady, if we plug something less than that, like 3%, and we have 4% increases in revenue and the same set of expenditure assumptions, we just don't get there. We're still looking at huge deficits year after year. And then if you go down to a little farther on this spreadsheet, I also show what our ending fund balance is. And at 3% increases, we would wipe out our fund balance in the general fund at the end of 5 years. Now, even at 7.5%, let me change this back. We're going to draw down on our fund balance for the next few years, such that at the end of 5 years, we're at 21%, which is a little bit less than what our policy is at 25%. So there are going to be deficits for the next few years, but as you can see from this row, they go down every year, and we get closer and closer to balanced.
Madam President, if I might.
Trustee Brady.
Michael, I'm not picking on police and fire pensions, but, we know we have to make up a huge contribution deficit on that. Is that in there over and above what we would the normal increases per, let's say, the amount of employees or whatever? What are we doing with that?
I have line items on the spreadsheet for IMRF and police and fire pension increases, and for the purposes of this spreadsheet, I've assumed 6% increases, annual increases in pension costs in general.
Is that to get it caught up by the year 2033?
Well, that's just based on conversations I've had with the village's actuary. I think that's a reasonable assumption, and reflects our best guess as to how those are going to increase in the coming years.
What percentage are we funded in those two pensions?
Both the police and fire pension funds are right around 70%, little less for fire. IMRF is a little bit more than 70%, 74%, I think. And by 2040, I believe, we have to be at 90%. So that unfunded liability that we have is being amortized over, the next several years.
Well, I look at this, and it tells me that unless we, at minimum 7.5%, the other alternative is let's knock a few points off of the expenditures. That's the only solution. Let's meet halfway, because I don't think we can just keep going 7-8% increase every year. That's ludicrous. That's too much.
And can I just address that? When I said earlier that I didn't think 3 or 4% would be adequate, and you made the comment that it should be tied to the CPI. If we had a balanced budget, that would work. A 3 or 4% increase in the tax levy. The reason it has to be higher is because we have this large deficit. You know, if our expenditures are rising at a 3 or 4% rate and you increase the levy by 3 or 4%, assuming you're already at a balanced point, you should be okay. But the 7.5% is intended to get us back to balanced. It's the 3% increase in the CPI plus an additional amount to eliminate the deficit.
When is our bond paid?
We're going to be paying, unfortunately, we're going to be paying for our bonds for many years to come.
That's it.
Does anybody else have a question? Trustee Heim.
Thank you. We've been agonizing over this situation for a couple, 3 days now. And in order to make a really qualified judgment on this budget and where we're going to be going, because you're asking us to commit a certain amount of money for 5 years in a program, not knowing how the economy is going to go and everything else. And this is what put us in harm's way. We are still in this so-called Great Recession. The people here that came here tonight and said, we don't want to lose our senior center, this is a place where we can go. Oh, I don't know where that came from, but it never came from this board. The thing that we have to be careful of is that we live within our means. If our monies go down that we take in, we have to adjust the way we live. And we've all done that. Most of the people they have certain salaries and that's it. I'm not one for taking and raising the taxes to take care of a deficit, okay? Because there are other ways of doing that, and it has to both go together, and I haven't seen yet how we are going to take a portion of that 7.5 and cut different things in order to make it work. I've seen stuff that you don't recommend, okay? I want to see stuff that you're recommending, more of it. I want to see where these cuts are going to come from. And maybe I shouldn't use that word cut, okay? It's like selling Twinkies. You didn't sell enough Twinkies, so 18,000 people are out of a job. We only can get our money from a certain place, and that's from taxes and assessing values and charges for permits and that type of thing. But if we're spending more money than we're taking in, you got to plug the hole. Otherwise, it's going to keep going. Until I see that, I'm very disappointed in how we've gotten to this situation right now.
Trustee Jersey.
Michael, what's balance? Line number 39. What is that? Balance what?
It's everything else that's included in the general fund budget that isn't noted on another one of these lines. So it's basically, you know, all of your contractual services and your commodities and things like that. Anything that's not specifically there. You know, earlier I talked about the general fund budget, or we have talked in the past about the general fund budget is roughly 77% personnel related. So you've got salaries, health insurance, and pension costs and overtime. The balance is everything else.
But see, I guess that's the problem that I have. And we talk about raising taxes, and I've been an opponent not to, because I think there's other ways that we can raise revenues. But what bothers me is the other. The other, whatever that may be, is a status quo. You know, John talks about the new way of doing things, the new budget, the new this, the new that. The only thing new I see here is the old is continuing to raise taxes and the status quo regarding everything else. We need to do things differently. I've every budget for 13 years now, I've been screaming about overtime, and everybody looks at me like I got 4 eyeballs in my head. It's $1 million a year and continues to climb. So the way we're doing business, the way we do core services, I know it's not popular with the troops, but oh well. When you only got $30 million coming in, and every year based on your projections, we're going up $1 million, and I don't see $1 million in new revenues coming in, well, we got to do business here differently. We got to continue to do things differently. And throwing Band-Aids and threats of closing the senior center to save $300,000 is a joke, number one. Number two, I don't like the way we do things regarding revenue. We talk about this, John, $40 million mortgage that was funded through, and the monies went to, the Capital Improvements Fund, which generates dollars of over $2 million a year. And based on what you're talking about, cuts, go back to that page, your 5 recommendations here. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That you were in there? Well, you're talking about increasing the user tax by 1%, and again, it becomes a general fund nightmare again. Those dollars were allocated when that user tax was established to go into capital improvements. We decided to go out for $40 million in bond to invest in this community, and we did, okay? But we're talking about the revenues that were being generated separate from real estate taxes, separate from the general fund, separate from personnel, to be paid for through that fund. Just like you have water and sewer funds. This is what I was hoping would be different. We look at things, everything's the general fund, but we have the water and sewer fund with millions of dollars in it. We have a capital improvements fund that's got millions of dollars going into it, and with expenses, of course, and everything else. But why are we taking the burden to the general population? Okay, because when we did that $40 million, it was based on revenues that we projected coming in based on user tax. That's why we did it. It was never going to be a burden to the general fund and have to raise taxes to pay for it. That came down the road later. And that, again, every year I say the same thing. But I don't see the change. You want us to make a decision to raise taxes, but I don't see no sacrifice here. I don't see anybody here, and I'm sorry to say it, whether it's popular or not, tough. But where is, you know what, your $4 million balance other, you know what, guys, 10% we took off of that. And here's a list of what that is. We sacrificed on our end here to cut this or cut that. I don't see it. And that's really hard to swallow based on your assumptions that, you know, our 5-year financial plan now is to raise the taxes 7.5% a year, which is compounded, which is going to generate $4.8 million. And if we do nothing else regarding staff and general fund expenditures, this is what we'll do. And this is where we'll be based on your projections. To me, that's not good enough. We haven't sat down here as a group to come up and really come up with a plan here. And instead of taking from Peter to pay Paul, from this fund to pay that, to make the numbers look better. I'm opposed to the $1.3 million coming out of capital improvements. I'm opposed of us taking the burden on $1.8 million every year, where it was supposed to come out of that. And we've done it the last couple of years based on the economics. And we talk about your actuaries. Let's get back to the pensions. You know, actuaries created this mess. They did. The actuaries created the mess by many years ago not to make contributions to the pension fund, and today we're paying for it. Your statement in here saying, you know, the stock market was different. The stock market's higher now than it was 3 years ago. I don't know what these guys are doing with the money. And I know they're talking in Springfield, and supposedly all the mayors met last week, and they're trying to come up with some kind of solution to make this affordable for everybody. But we need to be 90% by 2040. And we need to do the right thing with the pensions. But to what point do we become bankrupt because of it, too? I mean, it's tough. So you talk about a financial plan. We need to sit down and get that. We've all had to do it. My God, we're all going through tough times. Everybody up here, too. It's not easy. But what are we doing? Other than raising the tax levy. That's been the only recommendation, to raise the tax levy. And a couple of options that are not recommended.
Can I respond?
Sure, please.
You know, you made a couple comments, so I want to respond to each of them. But,
go ahead.
With respect to the pension funds, you know, the Village of Wheeling has always made the actuarially required contribution. The village has done what it's supposed to do with respect to the pension funds.
Can I stop you, Michael? Back in the 90s, I've seen charts, I've seen things in there. There was many years we didn't put a dime in or based on an 8.5% return that these actuaries thought we were going to make on our money. 13 years we contribute nothing to the pension funds, and today we're paying for it.
Well, it was the fire pension fund that we didn't contribute. We were making contributions all along to IMRF.
But we took
and
guys'
police.
monies and didn't make contributions to it. That's always been the argument.
The village didn't make a contribution to the fire pension fund until 2004, and you're correct, that was based on what on actuarial assumptions. But in defense of that, that was back in a time in the 90s when the stock market was going through the roof, and an 8.5% return on investment was not unrealistic.
Sure, because you were getting that in your CDs.
You're getting 15, 20% in stock, 25, 30% in some of these mutual funds. And it's certainly unrealistic today, and we've made a concerted effort to bring those assumptions down to something more reasonable. But when you lower those assumptions, the impact is a higher employer contribution, so it makes it more difficult. But I do want to give credit to the board for the fact that the contributions have always been made. And that's not something that you can say in every community. So I think it's important to get that out there. With respect to the budget, we tried very hard to present a budget that maintains core services. And that's why this list of recommended deficit reduction options does not impact core services at all. For the last several years, we've been able to do that despite the fact that we've eliminated 38 and now are recommending a 39th position to be cut from the budget.
Can I stop you, Michael? You're right. It hasn't affected core services. You know what it's affected, Michael? It's costing us more every year for core services with less revenues coming in every year. And that can't work, like you said. That doesn't work.
Well,
we tried it 2 years ago. We cut staff. We did this, and we reorganized ourselves. But we're still in the same boat that we are today. It's costing us more, and we're faced with $3 million+ deficits. You can't keep going like this. So there's something we need to do.
And I agree that we can't keep going like this, but I believe personally that this budget has been cut substantially over the years to the point where there's virtually nothing left to cut. I mean, we're talking about maintaining core services. We cut 10% across the board in that everything category, that balance category.
After individual cuts, after manager recommended cuts, I then went in and put a 10% across the board reduction to everything in the other category.
And I have department heads who are telling me every day that we've cut the budget too much, that it's too thin. Training and education used to be, a few years ago, was $274,000 of the general fund budget. It's now $155,000. I mean, everything has been cut across the board. And every year we have to come up with $1 million of either cuts or new revenue. And honestly, I don't think there's anything left to cut. You may be able to go into an individual line item and pick something out that doesn't need to be in the budget, but it's not going to total $1 million.
I don't know, Michael. Again, I don't see the alternatives here. I really don't see the options other than a couple of things that's not recommended.
The alternatives, if I may, truly are looking at service level. The only thing, we talk structure, and I said it at the beginning, and it has to happen on one side or the other. Either we need to create new revenue that is permanent, or we need to eliminate our expenses that is permanent. So what that means is we need to eliminate bodies. And when you eliminate bodies, after having already eliminated now the 39th position in an organization that I think is quite lean, and as we saw compared to other communities, below what other communities have. But that doesn't matter. What matters is how we do business. Looking at other communities is simply a measurement tool. What matters is how we do business. And every department head has met with me, and we have reviewed what can be outsourced, what can realistically be outsourced, what can we do to create new revenue. We talked about that, I think, at some good length on Saturday the 10th when we talked about what new ideas have we come up with in order to create new income, which is very difficult for a government body to do because we are a service industry. That's what we do. We provide a service, and there is a cost to doing business. And that cost mostly comes on the upkeep of personnel. So when we look at trying to do something structurally, it has to happen on either the revenue side or the expense side. And on the expense side, you're not going to find it in your line item budgets. You're going to find it in personnel. And at this level, we're talking about affecting services in some way, shape, or form. You can tell me to eliminate 10 positions, and I'll do it. And I'll tell you what the effect will be on the public.
Let's go back to the servicing debt, Michael. If that servicing debt came out of the general fund, you abated $2.1 million, less than a couple of bonds that are the general fund's responsibility, what would it do to the bottom line? And were those servicing debts are actually paid for by the sewer and water and capital improvements, based on revenues that are generated through those funds? How would that number of 3.5 look different?
I'm going to ask you to repeat the question because I'm not sure I understand it.
You have servicing debt that's allocated, that's part of the budget, the general fund budget of $1.8 million.
Right.
Okay? Actually, the abated amount is probably 2.1, but there are a couple of bonds that are the responsibility of the general fund. They're being paid through the general fund.
Right.
You have other ones that are capital improvement bonds that we
Yes.
talked about, the 40 million, some sewer and water bonds and stuff like that. If those were actually paid out of those checkbooks, those two line item, you know, the servicing debt, that $1.8 million was paid out of between the sewer and water, between capital improvements.
Yeah.
How would it affect our bottom line on the general fund budget?
Well, okay, I understand
You
that.
see where I'm going with
Yes.
that?
You know, the 1.8 million that you see on this slide reflects all of that money going back to the property tax levy and being funded by the tax levy. The reason it was $412,000 last year is because we were using $1.3 million from the capital projects fund to pay that debt. That leaves virtually nothing in the capital projects fund for capital projects. So to answer your question, if we put the $1.3 million back in to the capital projects fund to pay that, then it would reduce our deficit by $1.3 million. And if I went back to the slide where you have staff's recommended reductions, that would get us to balance. The reason John and I, if I can speak for the village manager, don't feel that that's a good idea is because we've done that for the last few years. And the result has been that we have not funded our infrastructure needs to the extent that we need to. This is the reason we've got it back here in the general fund, in effect, or on the property tax levy, is so that we can stop taking from the capital projects fund and use that money to do street projects. You know, if the board were to approve this staff's recommendation for the tax levy, what we would do is we would go back as staff and find a street project that we can do next year that we otherwise wouldn't be able to do. I think it's critical that we start reinvesting in our infrastructure. And listen, it's really six of one, half dozen of the other.
I know.
You're either taking money from the capital projects fund to pay the debt service, or you're taking it from the general fund. You're either running a deficit in the general fund, or you're creating a situation in the capital projects fund where you're not funding your infrastructure.
Michael, if you would, could you advance a slide or two? There's actually a slide specifically dealing with capital project fund funding status.
Yes, and that's in a different... This shows the status of the capital projects fund, and I just wanted to try to make this more clear than I have in the past. Our existing revenue based on a 4% gas and electric use tax is about $1,760,000 a year. If we were to increase the use tax to approximately 5%, it would generate another $400,000 roughly, and we would be at about $2.1 million. Here's the expenditures that come out of the capital projects fund on an annual basis. For many years, we've charged about $248,000 of engineering salaries to the capital projects fund. The reason for that is because our engineers essentially exist to design capital projects. So we've done that for many years. For many years, we've had existing debt service of $386,000, which is related to bonds that were sold for for the old Public Works building. And then I put a line item in here that if we were to allocate $900,000 or half of the $1.8 million to pay for the building debt, that would mean that our total annual expenditures in this fund would be $1.5 million, and that leaves $626,000 each year that's available for other capital projects. And that's why we're not recommending using the capital projects fund money anymore to pay for the building debt, because $626,000 is just not enough. We have a lot of streets in this community that need work done.
What's the fund balance in there today?
It's roughly, off the top of my head, it's roughly $1.5 million, a couple $1 million.
And keep in mind, this slide also reflects the increase, and on the third line, you see it reflects the increase in the utility tax. So if we didn't increase the utility tax, that bottom line would actually be $226,000.
Right.
Well, let me ask you this. Trustee Vogel brought up a good point. With the old Public Works building, what happened with the money with Mavis with that? Where did it go?
That's gone back into the capital projects fund. So in the last few years, because of those rent payments, we have more money in the capital projects fund than we would.
Only $1.5 million as of now?
Yeah, because we have been doing some capital projects.
Oh, I understand.
But not nearly what we should be doing.
If not for that money, though, we wouldn't have been able to do any capital projects.
We wouldn't have any fund balance.
Right.
Boy, how did the village survive years ago before we had a CIP fund? Think about that. We had to do a user tax. The fund take care of our things that we needed, like street lights and fencings and all that other stuff in town.
Yeah, and I think the tax is probably one of the smartest things that the village has ever done.
Sure it is.
Because it's earmarked. I mean, it's easy for people to understand why they're paying their tax. It's earmarked for infrastructure.
Remember that first meeting, Michael? Your suggestion was just put it in the general fund? And the board turned around and said, if we're going to collect a user tax, we're going to put it and earmark it towards that, and look at what we've done in the last few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all I have for, I'll shut up, quiet for a minute.
Are there any more questions? Statement, Trustee Lane?
Going back to the statement I think John made about cutting personnel, what would that do to overtime costs?
In a one-word answer, it would increase them.
Well, and it figures it would, but how?
I think in order to, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be snide, but I think in general it would increase overtime costs. I think in order to really answer that question, we'd have to talk about what positions we're cutting. And I would have to really do some research to figure what we can do. I can't recommend any cuts. Can we do them? Yes, but every one that we do will have an effect on the way we're able to provide service. I mean, being down, and I know this is a song that has been sung in the past, but it bears repeating. Being down 39 employees in an organization that only had 250 at the time is a substantial cut. And we have not affected our service level. And I'm very proud of that fact. And we have changed the way we do business. And there were a number of slides on the 10th that showed the way our expenditures are trending down in total, even though our personnel expenses are going up $1 million a year. Our budget, and I had said this on the 10th, we're not like the state of the federal governments where we can cut projects, we can cut grants. We don't do any of that. Our budget is it exists purely to provide a service. So looking to our line items to balance a budget simply isn't going to work, which is why I say again, it has to be on one side or the other, but it has to be structural.
Can I ask a question regarding something?
Yes.
Regarding planning, okay? Explain to some folks, too. We talk about TIF, and the perception of TIF is, my taxpayer money, and really TIF dollars that are being generated really doesn't go into the general fund, except for the minimum of the taxes that were actually paid when the TIF was created. any increase of those taxes are actually going into a separate fund, not the general fund. There are so many funds in this village, folks, I'll tell you, you get dizzy. But I'm trying to explain it. Let's use our oldest TIF, the Crossroads TIF. That started in 1985. We got an extension to 2019 because there were some unfinished projects. The EAV, and maybe you can piggyback on this, at that time, if I recall, was probably in the neighborhood of $12, $13 million. What that was, the assessed valuation of all the properties in this TIF, what the properties were worth and what the taxation was based on. Today, that number, correct me if I'm wrong, in the 50s?
50 or so.
50 is. So we get dollars based on the old amount, technically, and all the other taxing bodies as well, is that correct?
Yes, they're collecting their taxes based on the 12 million.
On the 12 million. The difference of taxes that we're getting based on the new value is going into this new checkbook. It's called the TIF, the Crossroads TIF. What kind of numbers, what kind of revenue, if just getting, when the TIF expires, or we choose, we can eliminate a TIF anytime. If we find no need to continue with the TIF, we can surrender it and say, you know what, everybody get their fair share based on some new development, some new AV numbers. What kind of numbers, let's use the Crossroads TIF, would that generate if it were to stop in 2013 or 2014, come into the general fund with? Do we know? Ballpark?
Well, yeah, I can answer that. Right now, there's about roughly $2 million of increment coming into that TIF district each year.
Okay.
As you'll recall, a few years ago, the village entered into an intergovernmental agreement with the other taxing districts to declare a surplus every year of 72% of that increment and return it to the taxing districts. And we've done that since 2005. And in fact, in a couple weeks, you're going to have a resolution before you to declare a surplus again for this year. The village gets its share of that too, which is about 10%. So roughly speaking, the general fund is collecting about $200,000 a year, $225,000, something like that, as a result of that declaration of a surplus every year. When the TIF ends, or if you were to end it early, the only additional revenue that will be captured is the other 28%.
Okay.
So it'll be more money, but it won't be a huge inflow of funds.
Unlike maybe some of the other TIFs down the road.
Right. Now, any of the other TIF districts, the South Milwaukee TIF is an example.
Good example.
It, brings in significant increment every year, and we have not declared a surplus. So technically, if the village were to close that TIF early, that would be money that would come back to the general fund.
But that's what I'm saying about planning. There's other ways of collecting revenue based on what we're doing today that may not be the right thing to do today. You know what I'm saying?
In that case, my personal opinion is that wouldn't be the right thing, because there's a number of economic development projects.
There is opportunity right now. And again, we talked about prioritizing these TIFs too, and we're still waiting to do that. And we need to, probably 2013, we will do that to get a better handle on what we're doing over there. Okay.
Do we have any more questions, statements?
I think, this is a discussion, and I do think we need to come to some kind of conclusion. If the board's direction is to eliminate positions, I can come back to the board with my recommendations. Again, I don't know that we can survive that without affecting service, at which point we do need to look at what our core services are and how we are able to provide them. As I had said earlier, the recommended deficit reduction options are simply that. They are our recommendations. As Michael had said, these continue to provide for our core services and do not affect service levels. There are other options that we can consider. There are a number of them that we can talk about, but again, those would have some other negative impact. And we're obviously happy to piecemeal these together in order to come up with a package that the board sees as a feasible conclusion. Furthermore, while we did look and we're looking at a 5-year plan to deal with our deficit, and we are now talking about 7.5 for the next 5 years, that is certainly not written in stone. That would be evaluated every year, and the board would have to approve that amount every year. So I just want to be clear that while that is what we're talking about, that is what that spreadsheet was showing, obviously it would be updated annually to look at current projections, the current realities, and the board would again have to approve any tax levy increase. So the board is not signing up for a permanent solution. However, I do think we need to think about our deficit as a 5-year plan.
May I say something? That's unfair of you, John. Asking us what should be eliminated. You're the only guy that really knows what goes on in the inner sanctum of this village as far as a day-to-day operation. For us, asking us, well, who should we fire?
That by no means am I saying that.
Well, yes, you are.
Absolutely.
Yes, you are.
Okay.
Because, you know what? Here's the deal. You get $10 million for the general fund, work it out without any increases or 3.5% increases. That's the way it works. You're the CEO of this mashup. You're the guy that knows, you got your finger on the pulse, the daily pulse of everything. To ask us what's going on, what can we do to reduce it? You know, what are we going to say? Eliminate an ambulance, eliminate people? We don't know who's critical.
I am by no means suggesting that the board do that. Actually, quite the opposite. What you said earlier is true.
Well, you're not giving us any recommendations. You're telling us it's our decision, our decision, our decision. What are your recommendations to eliminate the deficit?
My recommendations are on the screen.
You're recommending closing the senior center? Or
That's
what are you
not, my recommendations are on the screen.
Recommendation is on the screen, not the
Okay.
close. And I think the thing that came up about the senior center, if I may, way back, we had two trustees, Trustee Vogel and Trustee Lang, because the consideration was, at first, that someone wanted, maybe we could go with the Park District. Trustee Vogel and Trustee Lang sat down with them, and we found that wasn't the best option to go. So no one ever said, close the senior center. We did a study because people out there said, you know what, we need a little bit more room, we need this, we have to go there for art, we have to go. So we took in consideration with Trustee Vogel and Trustee Lang that work with them. Closing of the senior center has never been an option, and it wouldn't be an option, because when you're 50 years old, at 55, you're getting reductions. And they start saying, okay, you're 55 years old, you're now a senior, you're going to discount. So the senior population is growing in the village. So no one, I think that's where the assumption was, going all the way back 5 years, 4 years ago, that we had talked with the Park District and they preferred, and it wasn't feasible because financially we could never do what needed to be done if we did go with the Park District.
So, anyway, John, if this is your recommendation, you're saying we don't hire another engineer, one engineering position. We increase the gas and electric tax, and we increase the property tax levy by 7.5%. That's your recommendation. You know, if this were a real corporation counting on revenue coming in from what we do, and there was no extra revenue coming in for what we do, what would that corporation do? We're running the red for 5 years? You know?
But we can't operate like that.
Well, why not?
Because our costs are fixed. Now, obviously, they're fixed, meaning we provide a service. There is a cost to that service. That cost goes up every year. Forget expenditures. As we've talked about, nearly 80% of our budget is personnel because we provide a service. So when we talk about expenditures, we're only talking about 20% of our total budget. So right off the bat, you can see that there aren't these exorbitant expenses that are frivolous. Thinking that it takes 20% of anything in order to fund the other 80 seems certainly in line with logic. That said, our service expectations remain the same, whether the EAV in the community goes up or whether it goes down. Streets still need to get plowed, they need to get repaired. Police, EMS, community development, all of the services that we provide are a constant and cannot be altered based on the income of any particular year. Now, I completely agree with you that I think you had said earlier, that we have to live within our means. And when we presented this draft budget on the 10th, we had a number of charts to show, and unfortunately I didn't realize we were going to be going back to that, but we have reduced every aspect of this budget dramatically. And as you had said, I am the CEO of this organization, and I can't then make recommendations that I don't think are in the best interest of the whole package. Now, that said, what I'm saying there is, in one fell swoop, we can eliminate the deficit for this year. Assuming we deal with the structural side of our revenue stream, meaning we have more revenue coming in, we cannot do a street project next year. Take the 1.3 that's sitting in capital projects, and your deficit is gone. However, I can't make that decision for the public. That is clearly a policy decision that the board needs to make. I am by no means taking a burden and placing it on the board. But the decision to take away a CIP program for even a year and suspend it for a year is not something that I have the authority to do. So I don't mean to burden the board with anything, and I'm more than willing to take whatever reins I need to and make whatever cuts. But it will always come with at this point, it will come with a service level cut. And again, even if we did that and transfer the $1.3 million to eliminate the deficit for this year, that does not affect the fact that next year we are walking into $1 million increase just because of personnel costs. This is the way a government works, and it has to work that way. There's no other way. There are no other sources of revenue other than, and I'm very proud of what this board and our staff has done over the last several years. We are doing body work for the airport to create revenue. We're refunding or restructuring our debt in order to save money. We are doing things that 10 years ago no other municipality would have ever thought to do. We're spending money on attorneys and collating for electric aggregation in order to save our residents money. We are going far and above, as we should, we are going far and above what any municipality has ever provided as a service to their community. And I am extremely proud of this budget. I do not think that there is any fluff in this budget, but there is a reality that is the cost of doing business, and we have to address what that cost is. And unfortunately, when we raise taxes, it's not because we get nice new things. It's simply paying for what service is being provided. And we need to affect that structural revenue stream somehow, which is why I agree with you. It is very difficult for me to sit up here and say, well, raise taxes. Unfortunately, this screen doesn't talk about the millions of dollars in cuts that we've been making over the years. 39 positions is millions of dollars. That doesn't even address the annual reductions to our expenditures. And as we discussed earlier, not only were there manager adjustments, which you see in your line item budget, I then went back and said 10% right off the top, period, in addition to all of that. And as Director Monchain said, most of the department heads wanted to kill me. But that's the way it is. We have to do what we have to do.
Well, first of all, you said we're increasing revenue by taking all the airport's old equipment and refurbishing it for them.
Yes.
So because they're saving money by not buying new equipment. But yet, we have to have $7.5 million sitting in the savings account because we might have to buy a new squad car in 5 years.
But Trustee Brady,
wait, let me finish.
Sorry.
Let me finish.
Sorry.
The SURF fund is fine. When things are tough, and they're tough right now, this is not going to be forever. We're at the bottom of this valley, this budget, fiscal valley where the economy has gone to hell. It's on its way back up. It's going to be slow, might be a 3 or 4 year process, but it's going to come back up. People are going to come back and they're going to start building here. Our revenues are going to go. Everything's going to be looking good. We just have to survive a few years. That's all we're asking for. And yet, you know, the bottom line is raise taxes. Raise taxes. It's the easiest thing to say. You say it isn't. It's the easiest thing I've heard anybody say. Raise taxes. I haven't heard anybody say the hard things. Like, well, you know what? We're going to have to, maybe we're going to have to juggle core services or do something a little unique for 2 years to get through this. Once we get through this, we'll be fine. You know, and the people out there, the people that are paying these real estate taxes, you know, they'll have a better chance. They'll be all working, hopefully working and enjoying some increases in their salaries and their income, and maybe can afford the increases to the taxes a little bit more. But to just arbitrarily say, well, no, we can't extend the life of any of our vehicles. We need $7 million in the bank to buy new vehicles. When that comes, the fire truck in 3 years, you know, that's going to cost $1 million. We got $7 million in there. You know, what's the problem? You know, we bought 6 new squad cars last year, and they're sitting in the garage waiting to be used. I mean, there's no problems there, but yet you ignore that and you concentrate on other things that just don't make sense, John. And I don't understand why on a short term we can't tighten up for a few years and get through this.
When it comes to SURF, we absolutely can. There is. My job is to present fiscal responsibility, at least the way I see it. The SURF account is a fiscally responsible program that allows us to not burden the taxpayer with large increases when we have a capital expense for our equipment. On the 10th, Chuck Spratt came up and talked about all the things that we have done to extend the life of our vehicles. We have greatly extended the life of all of our vehicles. And the example you gave about the squad cars, we did. We bought a bulk purchase of a vehicle that was no longer going to be made, which saved the village tens of thousands of dollars because we no longer have to go out and buy, once a model expires, now you're talking about buying all new inventory, you're talking about all new maintenance procedures, all those things. We bought those cars specifically to not affect the SURF accounts. And that was a calculated move, not because we just wanted 6 new squad cars. The fact that they're sitting in storage is testament to the fact that we are not putting them in service in order to extend the amount of time between new vehicles being on the road.
Why are we putting so much in that SURF account right now then, if you've done all of this?
Because if you don't stay up to date, you will have to, remember, we may have $7 million in the bank, but we have $20 million in assets. What's our total, do you know?
I don't recall off the top of my head.
He said $8 million at the last meeting in rolling stock.
Right.
I don't know what the number is, but I mean, off the top of my head, I can certainly give it to you. But the idea is still, the program is meant to replace on an annual basis and eliminate the need for these fluctuations. But to your point, and I don't mean to argue at all, obviously I have to give my recommendations. The board can say, just like that, eliminate SURF, and there's no more deficit. I don't agree with it, because you will be seeing not only the increase annually for personnel costs, but now you're going to talk about coming up with another $1 million annually for equipment costs. So I don't recommend it. In fact, you know, the SURF is a very useful tool. We have implemented it. Trustee Argyris has implemented it at the airport, at Red Center. These are necessary and useful financial tools. Do you have to do it? No, you don't have to do it. It's my recommendation that you do in order not to further burden the taxpayers in future years, but you absolutely don't have to do it.
Trustee Vogel.
We've talked about this for over an hour tonight, and it comes back to the same thing. And John, I think you repeated it about 3 or 4 times in the last 15 minutes. It comes back to, we've cut everything we can. That's all left is to look at core services. And I think at this point in time, that's what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to look at core services. We're going to have to bite the bullet, and we're going to have to do it there. And that's my recommendation.
Madam President?
Trustee here.
John, what happens if this resolution fails tonight?
By law, every year we have to estimate what our tax levy increase is going to be over the prior year's estimate. We have to do that 20 days before we pass the tax levy. If you tonight's the last night we can do that to make December 17th. If there's a likelihood that the increase is going to be greater than 5%, we should pass an estimate tonight stating that. If you're still unsure, it's my recommendation that this estimate be the worst case scenario estimate, which is the 7.5%. It's non-binding. It's a non-binding estimate. What it does is trigger a notice. We have to then publish a notice between 7 and 14 days and set a public hearing on December 17th for the public to come in, give their statements about the proposed levy. At the same time, all the questions that have come up tonight can be looked at. But if you don't pass this resolution tonight with an estimate over 5% of an increase, and if we don't get the notice published in a timely manner based on tonight's estimate, you will be prohibited from increasing your levy greater than 5%, which, if you want to maintain that as an option, tonight is a resolution that should be adopted. If not, you certainly have the ability to go the other way. But tonight is a non-binding resolution for purposes of triggering notice so that we can be compliant with state law. We do it every year. The explanation, I think it was the same one I gave last year.
But in the year before that.
In the year before that.
And before that.
Thank you.
So we need to determine the amount of the tax levy for 2012. It's a resolution. And we need to have a motion. Motion by trustee Lang.
Yes. At 7.5.
For how many years?
It's
It's only
1 year.
It can only be
at a
1
time.
year.
1 year only.
It can only be
Not
1 year.
even binding.
1 year at a time.
It's not even binding.
anyway.
It's not binding at this
I
time.
understand.
You know, the sad part is, and I know, sad part is when we start talking about increases, I bet you nobody thinks about the soda pop that they buy in the store. They don't think about it, poof. They don't think about $10 a pack for tobacco use because Chicago just raised that up there. We're talking about servicing a community that is excellent if you look at other communities. I remember sitting here many, many, many years ago, and I always refer to when they didn't do anything with the water bill. And all of a sudden, the first year I was on there, or the second, they raised the water bill 30%. We don't want to get into that situation at all. It's just like you take care of your household. You want to go on a trip, you start today because next year you want to go on a trip. You're going to put so much money away, and you know what you can do and what you can't do. If you can't save enough to go on the trip, you're not going to go on the trip. You're not going to think about it. You're going to use it for what you need. So 7.5%, I'm looking at, whoops, 7.5%. The one question often asked is what the impact of the property tax levy will have on an average Wheeling homeowner. For 2011 tax year, the owner of a home with the $6,000 tax bill would have paid approximately only, and I say $630 to the village. An increase of 7.5% for the tax levy of 2012 will result in a resident paying an additional $47 in taxes to the village, or a total of $677. If you take $47 and divide it by 12, how much is your extra money that you're going to have? So that's all I wanted to comment on, because I'm a great pop drinker. And I never buy pop unless it's on sale. Never. I'll go without pop for a year if I had to, if it's not on sale. It's the same thing. I want the core services. I want to know my police are there. I want to know my fire's there. I want to know when there's a pothole in the street, instead of me having to go get a new tire, I want to be able to call and say, you know, we got potholes. You have to fix them. Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have the money right now. We can't look at it like that. You want to have all that you need to do that. And I don't see myself personally, and it's just my personal, that we've overdone or overindulged in any goodies, if you will, in this village. And if 4 years or 5 years ago, we would have taken the 5 1/4 recommendation, we probably wouldn't be looking at 7 1/2 today. But we didn't, and we didn't do levies in there either, a couple of years without. So we're now at trustee Brady?
No, it was Lang. But I do have a question before you get the second on it, before it gets lost in translation. Trustee Vogel threw out there a suggestion, and is the village, if this passes tonight, we have until December to approve that levy. That's to understand. Okay, otherwise, if it doesn't pass tonight, we can't go over 5%. But there was also thrown out there by Trustee Vogel that he wants the staff to look at reduction. I just don't want...
Core services.
Core services. I don't want, is that the direction that the village is going to head? And I don't want somebody next time in December coming back and go, I don't remember that one. So what are we going to do before we vote on this?
Well, what was that question?
The question is Trustee Vogel wants the village staff to go back and look at the core services. Because this thing, if it passes tonight, it just sets it there at 7.5, doesn't mean it's going to go in effect, because we're going to come back here and vote on it in December.
December
Okay?
17th.
So what needs to happen in the interim is staff needs to go and obviously look at what Trustee Vogel has said. And that's the reason I want clarification before the vote goes. Otherwise, if we vote no, it's stuck at 5%. So here's your chance.
And if I may piggyback on that, I can't be the one to define core services.
Then who does?
The board.
Well, I understand, but I guess you're not hearing what he's saying, because I'm hearing it. I know they're hearing it, and I know people in TV land are hearing it. He just wants to come back and say, okay, if we do this, this, and this, this is what's going to cut this off. Okay?
That was my attempt at the next slide.
Next slide.
We had talked about the senior center. We had talked about the third ambulance. Those were the two that had come up as far as core services. Both obviously have a negative impact on the village for different reasons. Those are both ideas of core service. Those numbers are what would be saved on an annual basis. It does not include any assets associated with the service, such as the building itself for the senior center or the ambulance itself for the third ambulance in the fire department. We can talk, if you like, tonight about either of those. If you would like, additional recommendation or additional options, I think what would happen is I would have to go department by department, and the service reduction would be individual items in individual departments versus categorical sweeps like these two are.
I think that's probably what they're looking for. I can't speak for them, but I think that would give people a better understanding of what would or possibly need to be done. But I don't think anybody up here, and I know it's up there, close the senior center. That's not even, you can take that off the list because it won't happen. Yes, maybe the reduction, maybe some personnel or whatever, I don't know. I mean, these are all things that need to be addressed.
But you had that chance on the 10th.
We
and
did.
we should have addressed it.
We did.
We did.
Address
We
it.
did.
And then it was brought up that this would, prior to tonight, we would have had something in front of us that would have given different suggestions on how to deal with the 7.5%. Then we sit here tonight and we talk for almost 2 hours on the same stuff we talked on the 10th on. So the question is simple. Can you go back and do what you just said you're going to do, or do you want us to vote based on our gut feeling on moving forward on this. So I'm asking you as the CEO of the company to say, I will go back per the direction of the board and see where I can now bring some of this back down.
I will absolutely do that. I will bring a list of if this, then that, and the board can make those decisions. I absolutely can do that. Then if you're asking my recommendation, I would suggest that you pass tonight because it is just a placeholder, and then it remains an option for you pending the results of what I bring to you in advance of the 17th.
And that's what Mr. Ferrillo said.
Correct.
That you're not putting this in stone at 7.5, you're putting it in the event of when December 17th. December 17th, if you decide, okay, we only need 6, we're there. If you decide you need 5, we're there. But if we really need, and if we're going to have 7.5, we have covered by law what we need to do. And it's like any other municipality or anything, if you've been reading the paper and looking at what they're doing, this is how you do it. It's not saying, okay, it's 7.5%, we're done, we're finished. That's not true. December 17th, we have to have a public hearing, then the residents will speak if they have something to speak, and then Mr. Fondilis and the staff will bring something if you have any more questions, and that'll be the day that we need to do that. But the 7.5 is to give us that leverage in the event of. If you find that we can do it with 5%, 5% would come out. But if you found that you had to do 8%, you couldn't do it because you have 7.5%. That is why we're doing this as a leverage, not as a written in stone.
I'll second the motion that was already put on.
There's more discussion here.
You should second it before, if you're going to, I mean, you can discuss it and vote, but there's a motion on the floor without a second.
We'll second by trustee here, and then we have
You can
discussion.
keep talking, of course.
Sure.
Okay.
So
Go ahead, Bill.
I have
Ken was
trustee
first.
Brady.
I just wanted to make a statement that there's a lot more to core services than life safety. There's a lot of things in core services that maybe we can do without. Look at the state of Illinois. Earlier was it this year? No more counseling services. We're not paying for anything. Drop the whole thing. So that means there's people out there that need counseling. We're probably providing it for them now because there's no other place to get it. I was at the county, same way. You know, do we need to have all these counselors? Do we, you know, John, we can't answer that. You have, and your department heads have to answer these questions. Or ask them, whatever, you know.
Thank you. And who was next down at this end?
Me.
Trustee Juris.
I think it's got to be very clear that the department heads need to come back to this board. You know, John make reference that the budget's a good budget. Well, and I gave a mandatory 10% across the board, but when I look at the numbers, I don't count 10%, excluding salaries. I don't count 10%, congressional and all this other stuff that we got in here, consultants and all that. I don't see cuts in that. I think the challenges from this board to staff is alternatives on how they run their departments individually, period. What ideas, what new ways they can run community development or public works or do some different things at the senior and social service area there. Alternatives on how we run our business and with the possibility of cutting dollars, okay? Because even if we do the 7.5% and do nothing else, again, every year we're in the same boat. We have to change. We have to change. And John mentioned, I brought up things with the airport and Red Center about doing surf. Yeah, because they never had it. When they needed something, they had to go out and buy it. And they probably put money in the savings account to try to do that. And I'm not all for getting rid of surf, but you can't fund things you can't buy or can't afford to fund at this point. You can't. And there's some dollars there. Bottom line is, I want to, and I was hoping this year, because every year we say the same thing. Guys, think out of the box. What can we do differently? What do you see in your department that other departments have done on a trial basis and it's working for them that we haven't tackled or tried to do. We didn't see that in this budget. We didn't see it in last year's budget. And every year, every budget, we bring it up. It's not all about the dollars or personnel. It's about how we can be more efficient, maybe with a little bit less, or people doing 2 jobs versus 1, or eliminating a job because we're double doing the same job with 2 different people. I don't know. It's your department. You guys are the experts. And Ken's right. For us to sit up here and tell you guys what core services are going to cut, what personnel you're going to cut, how many sergeants you're going to have, how many command guys you're going to have, it's not my job to do that. It's not. How many white shirts to be in the fire department? You know what? I don't know. Don't tell me to cut 3. What am I cutting? Who am I to cut? Or anybody up here? So, again, we got to think differently here, and I welcome the suggestions from department heads, because you guys are the professionals, not the CEO. He signs the stuff. He okays the stuff. I want to see what's in your heads, because John can't do it all. He's not an authority to police and fire department or CD or anything else. He's not. Guys on the second floor aren't. You guys are, and I think that's the challenge that this board has asked for the last couple of years, and unfortunately, again, this year, we didn't see it. So.
Trustee Heim.
Thank you. I've looked at many budgets from other communities over the years, and there are ways that we can save money. There are ways that we can change the way we think in the village of Wheeling. And Dean's right. Trustee Ajers is right. It's up to the department heads to guide that, because you're the ones that are the professionals in your departments. So I hope you guys have a dialogue going on with the CEO and the manager, and then let it filter to us so that we can make a good decision. Because we have to make that decision. We're bound by law to do certain things, and we have to do them in accordance to time. However, when the piggy bank is dry and there's no more money coming in, you got to close the doors. And that's something that we don't want to do. This is a great community. They got wonderful services, no question about it. Now we want you to tell us how we're going to continue those core services being the best in the suburbs, and how to do it with a little less money. That's all we're asking. Thank you.
Trustee Vogel, did you have?
No,
Okay.
Trustee Hein?
Yes.
Trustee Argyris?
Yes.
Trustee Heer?
Yes.
Trustee Brady?
Yes.
Trustee Vogel?
yes.
Trustee Lang?
Yes.
President Evans-Scotto?
Yes.
I got a question. Do you need a consensus on this 1% on the other income stuff, or do you want to wait till the 17th and talk
No,
about that?
17th.
I think we can wait until the 17th.
Okay,
You usually do that on the 17th.
okay.
Ordinance 13C, amending section 1.26 of the Wheeling Municipal Code regarding a schedule of fees and charges for village services.
Mr. Monishing.
This is the annual schedule of fees ordinance that has been presented to you for the last several years, since 2006. The increase in the CPI this year is 2.23%, and this would increase the fees across the board by that amount beginning January 1st.
Question.
Trustee Ajers.
What do you anticipate the increase in revenue would be from this?
It's roughly about $15,000 or $16,000.
That's it? Okay. So move.
I have second.
Sorry.
Second,
Motion made by Trustee Ajers, second by Trustee Brady.
with a question.
With a question.
I noticed, just happened to notice when I was reading through it, we still have annual dog tag fees. I thought that was a one-time fee.
It is, but that one-time fee goes up every year based on this ordinance. So if you have an animal, you buy the tag, and then you don't have to get another one for the life of the animal,
Okay.
but that fee goes up every
Okay,
year.
because that's all it said was annual fee.
You're right, it shouldn't say annual.
Okay, thank you.
We have a motion on the floor. Roll call, please.
Trustee Hein?
Yes.
Trustee Argyris?
Yes.
Trustee Hare?
Yes.
Trustee Brady?
Yes.
Trustee Vogel?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Yes.
President Abiscato?
Yes.
Item 13D, resolution authorizing acceptance of the bid from Continental Wireless Incorporated for the purchase of 21 mobile radios.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by trustee Brady, second by trustee Vogel. Roll call, please.
Trustee Hein?
Yes.
Trustee Argyris?
Yes.
Trustee Hare?
Yes.
Trustee Brady?
Yes.
Trustee Vogel?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Yes.
President Abiscato?
Yes. Official communications, I'm sure all of you have looked around this beautiful village, and we have our department personnel to say thank you to for a wonderful job.
Absolutely.
Also for a nice evening that we had last night. Mr. and Mrs. Claus were there. Yesterday, we had more people than we had anticipated. We had our normal donation from the restaurant, Market Square, for the cocoa. We figured 350 for 350 people, and guess what? We ran out. We had things from Mr. and Mrs. Claus, and last year we had left over for, so we kind of went a little larger than last year, but we found that we didn't have enough, which is good, because it shows that the people in the community want to be there and want something for themselves. So we hope that you all enjoyed last night. We hope that you're enjoying going through the village. Going through the village, but I just want to say, and I speak for the board, I'm sure, that we thank you to the staff, to everyone that did for us last night to be able to present this to our community. So we applaud you for that, because it was a great job. And Clerk Simpson has an official communication.
This coming Saturday, Lollipop Lane opens with a visit from Santa Claus. It's open on Saturday and Sunday from 2 to 5, Monday through Friday from 6:30 to 8:30. And you get the children can get their picture taken with Santa Claus, courtesy of Stasic Chevrolet. And he's really good about it, and he takes family pictures, grandparent pictures, whatever they want, and he doesn't rush them through, and it's all free for everybody.
Where's it at?
Oh, I'm sorry, it's at Chamber Park at the church on Wolf Road.
Good idea.
Museum's open.
Oh, and the museum will be open on, thank you, the museum will be open on Saturday and Sunday from 2 to 4.
That's great. We have no approval of the bills. Board needs to go into executive session to discuss the purchase or lease of property by the village, the setting of a price for the sale or lease of property owned by the village, and pending, probable, and/or imminent litigation. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Motion made by trustee Hines, second by trustee Here. Roll call, please.
Trustee Hein?
Yes.
Trustee Argyris?
Yes.
Trustee Hare?
Yes.
Trustee Brady?
Yes.
Trustee Vogel?
Yes.
Trustee Lang?
Yes.
President Abiscato?
Yes, board goes into executive session at 9 o'clock.
Got 10 minutes.